For this week's CIB topic, I will be covering the offshore WTO battle between Antigua and the United States. As a part of some of the topics we've covered so far in international business, we've identified some of the risks of operating businesses in different jurisdictions. And I chose this case because it provides a very unique perspective of U.S. companies or personages doing business outside the shores of the US with customers back in the US, and in doing so, running afoul of the laws in the US. Additionally, one of the parts that we will cover in this is the impact to local economies on laws in different sovereign states where their citizens as customers are concerned. So, the players. The players in this case are Antigua and Barbuda in the Caribbean and the United States. And Antigua and Barbuda is a tropical Caribbean island covering about 400 square miles, which is roughly about two and a half times the size of Washington, D.C. The population is about 69,000 people, and the GDP, as rated in 2009, is about 1.2 billion. The dispute. The dispute in question here was that corporations had set up in the tiny island of Antigua and provided gambling services to citizens of the United States as a legitimate activity as it was licensed in the Caribbean island of Antigua and Barbuda. The problem came about that there were some lawmakers who had concerns that children and college students could have access to gambling via the internet, and they would be able to do so with little or no control mechanisms in place. As a result, the lawmakers set about to criminalize organizations that were conducting online gaming under the premise that they also could be contributing to money laundering activities. The legal contradictions. So, several legal contradictions existed in the fact that the United States, through the federal government, sought to prohibit offshore gambling in Antigua, at the same time allowing states to make determinations about their own laws with regard to gambling. In some of the states, as we all know, places like Nevada, New Jersey, Oregon, South Dakota, and others have permission to operate within their borders for different types of gambling. And so this created a very unique circumstance where the government sought on one hand to prohibit an activity, but permitted it within its own shores. So we look at the revenue loss that was experienced, and it is indicated that the revenue peaked in 1999 at about $90 million a year. This is conflicting though because it's not necessarily readily available that these companies provided all of their income numbers. But the anticipated revenue made would have been between 90 and greater than $100 million a year. So the Antiguan government took the United States government to court, and they took them to the WTO, and a dispute panel was formed to take a look at the act and how the act contravened fair trade and determine whether or not the Antiguan government had a right to declare themselves aggrieved and if they needed to be made whole by the United States government. The outcome was the Antiguan government won the WTO ruling. The United States subsequently appealed the WTO ruling, and eventually, after a lengthy appeal window, the Antiguan government went back and requested that after the WTO had again come back and found the United States government guilty, and the United States government had made no movements to provide any judgments or any payments to the Antiguan government, they asked for the right to suspend $3.4 billion worth of IPR, which would comprise copyrights, patents, and trademarks, arguing that this was the value that was taken when the online gaming services were disrupted. The United States challenged this estimate and claimed that the true value would have been a half a million dollars. And the WTO agreed to authorize the suspension and settled with both nations on a figure of $21 million a year, indicating that for that 5 year window, the Antiguan government could seek to infringe on copyrights and intellectual property to the tune of $21 million a year for a 5 year window. As of the reading of this document, that has not been implemented, notwithstanding the fact that the latest finding was some 13 years ago. And so the question that I would pose to some of the other members of the class would be, what is your position and what would be your thoughts on a situation in reverse where the United States seeks to impose sovereign laws on a country on a company operating outside of its shores doing business with its citizens? Do you think that this would be a situation that merits additional review, or do you think that this would be an okay set of circumstances? Bearing in mind the WTO also found that the laws that impinged on free trade were not fair.